Welcome to the second lesson in the language of line. In this lesson, I'm going to introduce you to the most important and fundamental kind of line you're going to draw, the contour. A contour is essentially the boundary of something. A contour line describes the edge of an object. Now, there are two different kinds of contour lines we're going to talk about in this lesson, outer contours and inner contours. An outer contour is essentially the outline of an object. An outer contour creates a boundary around whatever it is you're drawing. This boundary says that everything inside the contour is part of the object. Everything outside of the contour is not. Inner contours are any lines that occur within that outer boundary. Outer contours and inner contours work together to describe the form. So to get a better sense of how this works, let's head to the drawing board. So here we see the outer contour of our subject, an acorn squash. An outer contour is essentially just the outline of a subject. It describes the two-dimensional shape. Now there are a couple of things I'd like to note about the outside contour. If you let your eyes follow the edge of this outer contour, you'll see that it's incredibly detailed. Notice how many times it undulates in and out. It contains many curved lines, but also a number of angles. But despite all of these details, I want you to notice that there is no indication of three-dimensionality. The outer contour just establishes this two-dimensional flat shape. So in order to give the illusion of three-dimensionality, we need inner contours. An inner contour is any line that is inside the outer contour. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to add some inner contours. To do this, I'm going to need to draw the stem of this acorn squash. First, I'll draw it simply just as a conical shape or a tapering cylinder. Once I've sketched in the shape of the stem, I can start drawing the inner contours. Just like anything else, I'll start them lightly at first and then darken them once I feel more comfortable. Notice that as soon as we start to add these inner contours, the subject begins to appear more three-dimensional. I'm drawing the inner contours using incredibly light and also soft lines. I want to be able to correct these forms if I need to. So now that I've drawn most of the inner contours lightly, I can start to darken them. But as I'm darkening them, I want you to notice something. Each inner contour of this subject begins its life as an outer contour first, before diving inside the form to become an inner contour. Once again here, we have an outer contour that dives inside the form to become an inner contour. Now when this happens, when an outer contour dives inside the form and becomes an inner contour, we call it an overlap. This outer contour here dives inside and overlaps the contour that's behind it. This gives the distinct impression that this part of the subject is in front of this part. In fact, we can establish a hierarchy of overlaps that depict what parts of our subject are in front and what parts are behind. All over this subject, we find overlap after overlap. Here we can see this line starting as an outer contour and then diving inside the form, creating an overlap here. And this line dives inside the form and overlaps this part of the contour, which dives inside the form and overlaps this part of the contour. Notice that the more overlaps we create, the more three-dimensional the object begins to appear. Now, many of these outer contours that dive inside and become inner contours go all the way to the stem, but some of them tend to disappear. Once this contour dives inside the form, it quickly fades out. Once an outer contour dives inside and becomes an inner contour, we want to follow it to its conclusion. Inner contours and overlaps are some of the most powerful tools we have to create the illusion of three-dimensionality. So I've taken a few minutes and detailed the contours of this subject. I've darkened many of the outer contours, and I've added more detail to the inner contours. Now, inner and outer contours can be made up of any kinds of lines and marks we want. You'll notice that some of the inner contours are dark, hard, and heavy, while others are light and soft. So here's what I want you to take away from this demonstration. We've been working here with two types of contours. We started with the outer contour, which was just an outline of the subject. It created a flat shape, almost like a silhouette. Next, we added inner contours. An inner contour is any line that is inside the outer edge. And finally, when an outer contour dives inside the form and becomes an inner contour, it often creates what is called an overlap. This drawing has numerous overlaps. So hopefully you now have a sense of how contour lines work. Outer contours establish the two-dimensional flat shape of the subject, while inner contours communicate three-dimensionality. And overlaps can show that one part of the subject is in front of another. So at this point, you should have a sense of how outer contours and inner contours work together to describe a form. Now it's time to put these ideas into practice. So today, you're going to be doing two classic drawing exercises. You'll be doing blind contour drawings and partially blind contour drawings. A blind contour drawing is exactly what it sounds like. While you're drawing, you only get to look at the subject you are drawing. You do not get to look at the drawing itself. A blind contour drawing focuses solely on the outer edge of your subject. The goal of a blind contour drawing is to move your eye around the outside edge of whatever it is you're drawing and to record every single little detail. Now, I recommend using pen for this project. During today's demonstration, you'll see me using a ballpoint pen. But you're welcome to use a pencil if that's what works best for you. Now, there are only two rules when it comes to blind contour drawing. The first rule is that once you start drawing, the line must be continuous. You do not get to lift your pen. Rule number two is that once your pen starts moving, you do not look at your drawing. You only get to look at the subject you are drawing. So let's head to the drawing board where I'm going to demonstrate blind contour drawing. So for this demonstration, my goal is to create a single line that moves its way across the surface of the page. First, I'm going to place my hand down on the paper in a position that I want to draw. The specific position of the hand doesn't really matter. And remember, this drawing is going to be one continuous line. I'm going to start that line here at my wrist, just above my watch. So to begin, I'm going to place my pen down on the paper. I want to leave enough room on the paper to draw my entire hand. So now my pen is placed and I'm ready to draw. From here on out, I am not going to look at my drawing. I am only going to look at my left hand. I'm going to slowly move my eye along the contour of my hand, beginning at the left side of my wrist. And as I do this, I want to move my pen so that it mimics the movement of my eye. I want to draw and record every tiny detail that I see in the contour of my hand. Remember, I am not looking at this drawing at all. So here I get to my ring, going up and over my ring finger. Now, when you do this project, you will be amazed how many tiny little details you start to see in the contour of your hand and your fingers. Remember, the goal of this drawing is not to make a good drawing. We are training our eyes, our mind, and our hand to see all of the tiny little details of the contour. I want you to note how slowly my pen is moving. This is because I'm moving my eye very slowly across my hand. As my eye travels around the edge of my hand and my fingers, my pen is mimicking this motion. My pen is following the same path my eye is following. Remember, the slower you go, the better. Now, I cannot see my drawing. I am sure that it is out of proportion and distorted, and that is completely fine. Once again, I want to remind you, this project is not about making good drawings. It is about training your eye and your mind to see detail in contour. So finally, I'm arriving at my thumb, And at this stage, I don't even know that I have enough room left on the paper for this drawing. I don't know how big or small my drawing is. All of my attention is going to focusing on the tiny details of the contour. I have not looked at my drawing once, and of course, I have not lifted my pen. All right, I am arriving back at my wrist. So as anticipated, the final drawing looks distorted, out of proportion, and a little silly. In fact, you never have to look at the drawing in order to get the benefits of this exercise. I tell you this because it's so important that when you do this project today, you don't get caught up in the final product. It is not going to be a good drawing, and that is completely fine. Hopefully you can see how many tiny details I was able to find in my hand. Every little fold, bump, and divot of the contour are recorded. And in this drawing, they're actually a little exaggerated. This is very common when you're doing blind contour drawings. Remember, the goal is to accentuate all of these details in the contour. So hopefully this gives you a sense of how this project works. You're drawing one continuous line that mimics the path your eye takes around your hand, and you are not looking at the drawing until you have gone from one side of the hand to the other. The goal of doing blind contour drawings is to sensitize our eyes and our mind to all of the details that we find along the contour edge. And I'd like to remind you again, this project is not about making good drawings. In fact, you can reap the benefits of this project without ever looking at your drawing. Today's projects are all about the experience, not about the final results. So now you'll see me demonstrate partially blind contour drawing. In a partially blind contour drawing, we are not sticking to the outside edge. We are looking for any reason to dive inside the form. We want to look for lines that start as outer contours and then dive inside and become inner contours. Now, while you're drawing, every outer contour line that you follow inside the form will eventually end. Some of them fade out, some of them run into other lines. But when that happens, you can look at your drawing long enough to place your pen back on the outer contour and start following the next line. This project allows us to explore overlaps and inner contours. So let's head to the drawing board for a demonstration. So now it's time to do our partially blind contour drawing. Just like before, I'm going to place my hand in a position that I want to draw. I want a position that's going to show a lot of overlaps. And just like before, I'm going to place my pen on my paper, trying to leave enough room to complete the entire rest of the drawing. Now I want to place my hand carefully because once I start drawing, remember, I do not get to look. So now my pen is placed and I'm ready to draw. I'm going to begin this drawing at the left side of my wrist, just above my watch. Just like before, I'm going to move my eye along the edge of my hand. But instead of following the outside contour, I'm going to follow the contour inside the form. And almost immediately, this line dives in. And once I follow this line until its conclusion, I can then look at my drawing only to place my pen back on the outer contour. Once again, I begin moving my eye along the contour of my hand, very slowly, having my pen mimic that motion. And once again, the outer contour dives inside, creating an inner contour. That line slowly fades out. Now I get to look at my drawing and place my pen once again back on the outer contour. I'm at the fold right at the pinky, so there are a number of overlaps here. So I followed this line in. Now I get to place my pen on the contour again while looking, but once my pen starts moving again, I no longer get to look. Almost immediately, the line dives inside the form once again. This line curves up and around the pinky finger. I now get to look at my drawing to place my pen back on the outer contour, and I begin again. Doesn't take long before my pen dives inside, this time for a very short line. So I get to look, place my pen back on the outer contour, and continue. So hopefully you get the idea at this point. I can continue this process all the way around the edge of the form. So this line is the tip of my pinky finger right here. But instead of the line diving in, it actually runs in to the fingernail. So I'm going to take my pen and bring it inside the form to draw the fingernail and have it come back to the outer contour. And then it dives back inside, which point I can look, place my pen back, and continue on. Once again, I have a line that comes and overlaps. I'm going to start on the inside to record that line. So this is very common where you'll run into lines that are overlapping the contour you're drawing. When that happens, simply stop drawing and you can place your pen inside the form and follow the contour out.